This story right here is amazing. This is vintage Donald Trump. So apparently, after the 2020 election, Trump really wanted to prove that the election was stolen. And so they brought in some firm to do a study. Now, in Trump's mind, he was bringing this firm in just to tell him what he wanted to hear. But the firm itself was like, no, we're actually going to do some empirical research here and try to give you an actual answer. Well, Trump didn't like that one bit, man. And they came back and said, yeah, turns out the election wasn't stolen. And he lost it. So this is in Mediaite. Trump paid research team to investigate 2020 election, then got mad and buried report when they found nothing. A new report from the Washington Post details a previously unknown element of former President Donald Trump's 2020 Redux obsessions, describing a comprehensive research project he commissioned to develop proof of election fraud and his response when the consultants failed to find the smoking gun he so fervently desired. Trump has made no secret of his desire to throw out the results of the 2020 election and declare himself the winner. He's never wavered from his baseless claims of election fraud, throws his endorsement support almost exclusively behind other candidates who indulge his election denialism, and has gone so far as to call for the termination of the U.S. Constitution. According to the Post Josh Dawsey, the Trump campaign paid research company Berkeley Research Group through a subsidiary called East Bay Dispute and Advisory consulting fees that totaled more than $600,000 in the final weeks of 2020. That's amazing. They really shook this guy down to tell him what he didn't want to hear. That's $600,000, Jesus. There may have been even more spent. The Post's sources said other outside researchers were also hired. Wow. So what did Trump get for his hundreds of thousands of dollars? Sources familiar with Berkeley's work for the campaign say that around a dozen researchers were involved, including econometricians, I never even heard of that before, who use statistics to model and predict outcomes, digging into at least a dozen hypotheses. The research work included Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. So in other words, the more contested states. Searching for possible voter machine malfunctions, evidence of dead people's names being used to vote, and other inquiries attempting to prove that the votes in these states should have gone to Trump instead of Joe Biden. Each of these states, except Nevada, voted Trump in 2016 and flipped to blue in 2020. As one source described the research, quote, they looked at everything: change of addresses, illegal immigrants, ballot harvesting, people voting twice, machines being tampered with, ballots that were sent to vacant addresses that were returned and voted, said a person familiar with the work who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private research and meetings. Literally anything you could think of. Voter turnout anomalies, date of birth anomalies, whether dead people voted. If there was anything under the sun that could be thought of, they looked at it. So this is truly, truly comprehensive. And you know what? For the price tag, it better be comprehensive. Because that's a lot of money to spend on something like this, man. The ex-president infamously lost over 60 court cases. By the way, he didn't even have standing with most of these cases. In other words, it was thrown out in the first step. They were just like, there's nothing here. Get out of here. In both state and federal courts, many of which were decided by Republican-appointed or even Trump-appointed judges. But Berkeley's research never made it into any of these court files. Quote, none of the findings were presented to the public or in court, wrote Dawsey, and that was for a very obvious reason. They didn't really find anything. Anything. The sources told the Post their researchers found issues typical of elections, some voting anomalies, unusual data patterns, and some instances in which laws may have been skirted, but none of it was evaluated as being significant enough to make a difference in who won the election. Guys, Joe Biden won the popular vote by 7 million votes. That ain't close, dog. That ain't close. He had over 300 electoral college votes. Now, to be fair, if the polls were right heading into the election, he would have gotten over 330 electoral votes. He didn't. So Trump actually did kind of slightly overperform his polls. But it wasn't anywhere near enough. So what are we talking about? It's amazing. When you want to talk about rigged elections, you have to talk about the 2000 election. The Supreme Court's turned the election over to George W. Bush. You had all of the major media outlets got together and did an analysis just like this in the state of Florida after the election was already called. And they counted the votes every which way imaginable. Dimpled Chads, hanging Chads, chatty Chads, everything. And they found that no matter how you did the recount, Al Gore won the state of Florida, which means he won the presidency. But Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida, and they turned it over to George W. Bush. Fox News called it before they even knew. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, nothing to see here. You can't do a recount because a recount would be totally unconstitutional. Yeah, whatever. That's fine. Unconstitutional. That's good. That was the actual stolen election. And we're talking about an election that wasn't even close. And he's still whining about it wrongly. Jesus Christ. The research also reportedly debunked some of Trump's conspiracy theories he was peddling about the election, including claims about rigged voting machines and mass voting by dead people. Berkeley senior officials provided a briefing for Trump, his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and several other top advisors in December 2020, conference call, according to the Post, and it did not go well. Here's what they say. I love this. Meadows showed skepticism of the findings and continued to maintain that Trump won. Trump also continued to say he won the election. The call grew contentious, people with knowledge of the meeting said. So in other words, look, it's a matter of religious faith for a guy like Trump. His ego will not allow him to state the obvious. No matter how much evidence, no matter how much data, no matter how many facts you try to get through to him, it's an ego protection racket. So you get, I won, tremendous. I can't lose to this guy. He's really old. He's like a zombie. He's basically dead. He's uninteresting. He's an establishment politician. Yeah, and you lost. And you lost. Maybe you shouldn't have mismanaged COVID massively. Maybe you shouldn't have been such a crazy, crass, insane weirdo all the time. So it pains him. But for the people around him who can't acknowledge the obvious, I mean, that's extra sad. Because, I mean, you're basically in a cult with this guy as your leader. Jesus Christ. But I love this. I love this so much. Because, to this point, the best evidence you bring up when talking about this issue is like, yeah, the over 60 court cases that Trump lost virtually every single one of them. The other thing you bring up, the audit in Arizona, which found that not only did Biden win the state of Arizona, he actually won by more than they thought he won by on election day. That was another phenomenal piece of evidence that, no, this election wasn't stolen. Now we have Trump's own team paid $600,000 for basically a giant forensic analysis of the election to determine if they actually won or not, and they came back and said, no, you didn't win. So naturally, hide it. It reminds me of when Trump would run in 2016, and anytime a poll came out with him doing poorly in it, he just would act like it doesn't exist. Anytime a poll came out with him doing well in it, he would talk about like it's the only poll that came out. I mean, he would even do it with totally unscientific polls, right? Like, I'm up 30 points. Wonderful. Phenomenal. Amazing. Thank you so much. Amazing. MAGA. Like, that's what he would do. But then there'd be a poll that comes out with him down 3 or whatever in a certain state. And he'd be like, fake news. Not even a real poll. It's Trump 101. But imagine spending that much money and then just burying the results because you don't like the findings. It's incredible. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.